From Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 5. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Cry to her. She has served her term. Her penalty is paid. That she has received from the Lord's hand double for all of her sins. So now a voice cries out, in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground shall become level, the rough places made plain. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. For this the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This is the word of the Lord. Well, good morning to all of you again. Last week, you might remember, in the scripture reading reminded us, this Isaiah Advent reading was to start to pray in this season of waiting called Advent, and to pray for something, what? Does anybody remember? Pray for something big. Well, this morning's Isaiah Advent reading, this is the assigned reading for this morning. I think in the same vein, Isaiah is now asking us, prepare for something big. If you're going to pray for something big, you need to now prepare for something big. And so as we continue to pray and now to prepare, would you pray with me over this text? Holy God, help us in the reading of your word to prepare a place for you to reside in our hearts and in our minds and in our souls. To prepare ways to put your word to work this morning with our gifts, with our talents, with our offerings. Help us to prepare for something big. Amen. So in just a few moments, you're all going to be invited to come forward and make a pledge to this church and to all of these people and to our beloved community, and above all, a pledge to God. That's what the pledge is about. That's what stewardship is about, our relationship with God. And this has always been a little bit of a double-edged sword for me. On the one hand, we've got to talk about money. I don't even like to talk about money in my own house. And it doesn't get any easier all of a sudden when I come here. On the other hand, it was suggested to me by a dear friend many years ago that I take this as an opportunity to pray for all of you, to steward you with prayer as you steward this church and its mission. And however resistant I was to that, and believe me, I was really resistant to it for several reasons. It felt too Baptist-y to me to have you all come forward. I don't know if you've ever felt Baptist-y, but it'll ruin your day, especially if you're a Presbyterian. It felt very extroverted to me, right? I got to interact with everybody all at once. I'm gonna definitely be taking a nap in the afternoon. It felt very individuated to me, and I love individual interaction, but I also love corporate worship. And so I felt weird about it for all sorts of reasons. And yet, I mean, this is like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I've come to relish this particular Sunday, even as I don't really like to talk about money, I relish this opportunity to pray for all of you. I've had newcomers, people I've never met before, come up and receive prayer, and it's wonderful for me. I've had all the oldies but goodies, they come up and receive prayer. I've had people, you know, their autograph is on the cornerstone outside. I have now COVID people who came to us during the COVID pandemic. It's all these seasons of our church, and they come up and they receive prayer, and we share a story together, and we share life together, and it's a gift to me. I'm grateful for it. But the stewardship piece is still hard for me. I always feel like I'm trying to bob and weave between Catholic guilt, which a lot of you come from a Catholic background, and then on the other side of that is like kind of Protestant, work your finger to the bone until you're dying and bleeding out kind of way of life, that self-sacrifice thing that we do here, although we say we're not like the Catholics. It's not an easy thread to needle, right? It's difficult to talk about, and I think Isaiah in this morning's text, just by matter of maybe coincidence, I believe providence, the assigned text for this morning, I think helps quite a bit, not in an easy way, but in a good way. And so many things that are good are not actually easy, and this text isn't necessarily easy, because the first thing Isaiah asks us to do in the text as we try to create this path now, we're praying for something big to happen, and now he says we got to create a path for something big to happen in our lives too, is he asks us to recognize the fallen condition of the human heart. So not the good stuff of the human heart, not the I love you with all of my heart. I'm talking about the hard stuff of the human heart. This is the other stuff we don't like to talk about, right? We don't like to talk about money, and then we don't like to talk about sin, or what we call sin. Isaiah calls it a wilderness. Now, there's a problem here because most of us love the wilderness, and so the metaphor gets totally lost on us. But what we think of as wilderness and what Isaiah has in mind are completely different. Most people in Isaiah's day were far more in touch with the wild and with nature and connected to the land and to the earth than any of us are today. They were agrarian people. Many of them are nomadic people. They know how to connect with nature, even in such a way that they can survive in nature. The wilderness that Isaiah is referring to, and the metaphor he's using here for the human heart, are these places of desolation where nothing lives and nothing grows and everything dies. And so therefore, the human heart, when it's left to its own devices, Isaiah is trying to tell us this is a place. This is a place inside of us that it's full of these valleys, these great chasms of separation that we have devised that disconnect us from ourselves, it disconnects us from others, disconnect us from God. And then he says, within us, within the human heart, where there isn't a valley, there's some big mountain. Not our mountains. We love our mountains. He's saying these mountains of desolation. These are places where we have built up rock, sharp edges. And we've done this as far and as high as the eye can see. Most of us do this to protect ourselves. These are these kind of self-generated hard places of the heart. And so Isaiah concludes, the human heart is rough. It's a rugged place. It's not a path. It's not a path to anywhere, let alone a path for God to arrive. It's a blockade. It's full of pitfalls. It's full of cuts and bruises. It's the place in us, and you don't have to call it the human heart, you call it whatever you want. It's the place in us where nothing grows and everything dies. And yet it's a place in us, and I think a lot of us have experienced this or seen this, it's a place in us that I watch a lot of people tend to for their entire lives. And the problem is that you can't have something big arrive on this kind of terrain, on the terrain of the human heart as it stands. So Isaiah says, you've got to prepare. You've actually got to now clear and move out of the way, a way for God to arrive. And so the soul in our text, the soul, on the other hand, being the part of us that is at the beginning of our text. The soul is the part of you that's able to actually hear God's words of comfort. The soul is the part of us that can receive, to whatever degree, usually a pretty limited degree, unfortunately, can receive the tenderness of God's care. The soul is the place that can rest in the reality that, as the text says, all is paid up, all is well. The soul, that place inside of you, it alights, it gets excited to hear about God's plan for something big. And in Isaiah's words, God's something big is that God's glory would be revealed and that all people, everyone, everywhere, they would see it. And he says they would see it together. Those are soul words. In fact, those human heart words, or that human heart place usually resists these kinds of words. So that's a silly idea. All of us, everyone, everywhere together, that's ridiculous. The heart actually blockades those words or creates disconnection from those words. Those are words that are trying to pierce and penetrate through all that stuff, all that plaque, all that calcification. It's trying to leap all the crags and then plow through all those sharp-edged rocks of that hardened heart. So the question becomes, well, then how do we prepare? How do we fill in the low places and demolish the high places? Given the state of our heart and given the yearnings of our soul, and then giving all the stuff that God is up to. How do we prepare for God's something big? Not just pray for it. For something as big as God being revealed for everyone to see. And if you think about that and you're able to take that in, really feel that, God revealed for everyone, everywhere to see, it doesn't get any bigger or better than that. For God to arrive in such a way that everybody everywhere sees and witnesses and experiences God, that's big, that's huge, that's everything. In this particular season, we celebrate that as the Christ who arrives at Christmas. That's our everything, this child that is born to us. But how do we prepare for that? Well, one incredibly important way, though we don't really like to talk about it in this way, but one very important way to prepare is to give. To prepare, we've got to give. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking a little bit about money. I'm talking about a whole, we have to adopt a whole attitude, a whole kind of disposition of giving. And I don't know how to explain that other to say I think most of us have experienced it and we know what it is. We know the difference between just the physical act of giving and then the spiritual activity of giving. And in fact, I think we know and we've experienced people that give everything. They give it all, and yet it's empty somehow. In psychology, we call that martyrdom syndrome, right? They're giving, but there's nothing to it. There's a difference between that kind of just physical act of giving all the time and then the spiritual activity of giving, adopting a disposition where I'm giving. And there's a big problem here, and the big problem is that we've got giving all mixed up. And it's in great part why I don't ever really like to talk about it. I talk about it one Sunday a year, and the elders say, could you talk about it more Sundays a year? And Parker says, will you talk about it more? I say, no, one Sunday a year. We get it all wrong. Even at the leadership level, we get this all wrong. And I'm not trying to pick on our church or our leaders, or I am included in getting it all wrong. This is every church everywhere. We don't do this the way that we're meant to do this. We don't approach this in the right way. And the reason I believe this is the case is in the Isaiah text. When we talk about money, when we think about money, when we give time, when we give resources, when we give, we ask human heart questions rather than the ponderings and the wonderings of the human soul. When we give, and we are trained to do this from birth on, we're trapped in this. I don't blame anybody for this. We ask human heart questions instead of the wonderings and ponderings of the soul. If you get to the bottom, and we're really good at disguising this, we're so good at disguising this, but if you get to the bottom, what's underneath what we're asking when we give? They're mostly ROI questions. I learned ROI, by the way, in the church. I never knew what that meant before I started, and it's not a church term, return on investment. We ask return on investment questions, which are terrible questions to ask. But it's exactly what we do. We ask this: if I give, what do I get? And we all do it. I'm not blaming anybody. I do it. We're raised this way. If I give, what do I get? And then your leadership, because we've got to look like leaders, we take your question and then we ask just as terrible of a question, but we rephrase it so we can look like your leadership. And we ask, this is how much they gave, so how much do we give? You ask, this is how much I give, what do I get? This is how much you gave, what do we give? Now, mind you, these are not terrible questions. Return on investment questions are not terrible questions to ask if you're buying some cheap thing made in China on Amazon. Read the reviews, please. They're not terrible questions to ask if your sketchy uncle is asking you to invest in yet another startup. Ask return on investment questions. But they are nevertheless, they are human heart questions. Some of you smiled really big at the sketchy uncle. And more than one of us has got one of those. Nevertheless, these are human heart questions. These are not the questions to be asked when we say, how do we prepare for God being revealed and make sure that everybody gets a front row seat? These are not God's questions, nor are these the questions of the human soul. And because they're the wrong questions, because these human heart questions are the wrong questions, we never get at the right answers with them. And so we end up so frustrated by this process that you end up with pastors that don't ever even want to talk about it. But let's just sit the two side by side and see if you can see what I mean by this. Let's sit God's something big beside our human heart question. God's something big is the glory of God revealed, and all people are going to see this together. How much and what do I get in return? Can you see how our giving questions in no way, and in fact they just can't relate to the subject matter? Our human heart question is not even in the same ballpark as God's plan, God's big thing that God is up to, that speaks not to that human heart question, it speaks to the center of your soul. Let's do this again, because it's such a fun exercise. I can tell you're having fun with this. We've been called here in Durango to a very particular expression of the church. And the way we articulate that is we say, we are called together to know Jesus and live in the Spirit and join in the Father's work. That's our big thing. That's our big thing. Know Jesus, live in the Spirit, join in the Father's work. How much and what do I get in return? Do you see how it doesn't work? It's the wrong question. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form prepare us for God's something big. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form prepare us for what we do at Advent, to prepare for Jesus to arrive. It doesn't prepare or equip us even for our own mission. This morning, we have to set down the questions of the human heart. On a morning like this morning, where you're invited all to come forward, we have to pick up the questions of the longings and the desirous wonderings of our souls. We have to prepare for God to do something big, and a big way in which we can do that, a concrete way in which we can do that, is we can give. Not the physical act of giving, adopting the spirit of giving. And in that way, you don't give to get. You would never say, I adopted a spirit to give in order to get something in return. It's not transactional like that. In this sense, you give whatever it takes, and for however long and for however much it takes, to lay every high place low and fill in every low place and smooth out every sharp place and every rugged surface, pave over in your own heart for God's something big to be revealed in us. Because, and this is the real good news of this morning in this text, is when it ends up being revealed in us, it then gets revealed through us. That's the big get in the church, is that people begin to see God revealed. God revealed through us. So we're going to shuffle forward in a moment. And in doing that, my prayer is that we could all set down. I don't really care what you bring up here. I really don't. Set down the human heart questions, the give and get questions. Pick up something bigger than that. Pick up something heavier than that, more substantive than give and get. That's something that's deep inside the human soul, screaming to get out from beyond all the blockades of the human heart. Pray for something big, God's something big to be revealed in you. Because when it's revealed in you, it gets revealed through you. So as we step forward this morning as best we can, and of course you're welcome to not step forward. It's not a requirement. But as we step forward this morning, give that. And all God's people said,